So what happens when Hoyo decides to release every shade on a random Wednesday? Well, you'd get me not having any sleep at all, trying to piece together every detail I could find about the shades, the Tsaritsa's plan, and why Columbina is the key to killing a god. Hey guys, what's up? Aru. And this is everything we know about the 4 shades in deep detail, their intervention once we get to Nodecry, and the Fatui's grand plan to kill the heavenly principles in his sleep. Now I can't be bothered to make a more flowery intro apart from that, so let's get started. First of all, who are the Shades? The 4 shining shades are primordial beings, manifestations of the heavenly principles, the primordial one, Panes. He casted 4 reflections of himself, giving form to the shades that we know today. I say he because Pierro refers to the heavenly principles as a male, but honestly that's probably another localization error. After all, the mirror shades appear female. But then again, Istaroth created Venti and they're different genders too. Gods can also take any form or gender that they choose, so who's to say? What matters is that these 4 shades embody core aspects of existence, the fundamental laws that govern everything in Teyvat. Something worth noting about all of the shades is that their rules are all oxymoronic and paradoxical to a fault. Basically, it's so unbending to its own rule without mercy. And Rhinnedottir's narrative through the fabricated people in the beginning explains that time abides no reason, for it deprives us all equally, yet brooks not a second to be reclaimed. Which means that time flows forward, never reclaimable, even when reversal might prevent suffering, just like the flow of time. Life abides no reason, for none are born by their own consent. Which means that life is unchosen, birthed by without purpose or consent, just like the small world of life she made in Asmoday's space cubes. Next, death abides no reason, for it cannot be defied even by those who see it coming, meaning that death is absolute and even foresight or sacrifice can't alter that end. This enforces the fate of death that astrologers like Mona and Barbeloth can see in others but not themselves, as well as the death that Ronova wants to witness that equates to using her rule in Natlan. Lastly, space abides no reason, but it was never finished and talked about separating the travelers. However, this does hold some more meaning related to space or void itself. A better line would be that space abides no reason, or it holds all things but separates them all the same. Just like the space or void itself in the original translation of void as outer space, which is related well to the false sky, likely being created by Asmoday and holding Teyvat together, but also keeping it apart from the rest of the universe. Now with that said, let's talk about our first and favorite paradoxical shade, Istaroth, the Shade of Time. Known as the God of Moments or Kairos, who actually is Venti's voice actor in pretty much all languages. Now this basically confirms that Venti is Istaroth, hooray, you can even hear her better in Japanese. But that's actually not it, since we not only need to explain why Venti exists when we thought that Istaroth died and reincarnated as Venti, we also need to check what Istaroth has been doing independently from Venti, which we've seen time and time again with her time travel powers and rewinding or fast-forwarding certain spaces, objects, and possibly even living beings in time. Yes, I meant living beings as in Rhinnedottir in both of her forms, the 2 time frames of past and future of the siblings, and even the specific history altering we've seen back in Sumeru with the Wanderer. Istaroth controls when everything happens and even keeps that from happening for as long as she wants. That's how A and Makoto were able to do what they can with the Sakura tree, and how this whole thing worked in the Days of Quest, which you can watch in my previous video of how Istaroth messed with our siblings using the hibernation key. Moving on, Venti might be a different story, and I think that he's a memo sprite of Istaroth while she's doing her job as a shade. It's honestly quite coincidental since Honkai's tutorial just finished its 3.4 patch, which reveals how Mem and March 7th might be a memo sprite of Cyrene. Now I'm not saying that fully the remembrance is here or that both worlds are connected, but it is possible that Teyvat's world is part of Star Rail's universe. Copies of oneself is already possible in Genshin anyway, so it might just be a Genshin thing instead. But I like the idea of memo sprites in Genshin and that it had to be related with time, which just annoys me how that's too much of a coincidence. All of the shades in the interlude teaser have similar motifs and symbols of stars, helixes, triquetras, and Solomon's knots, with the only motif missing being Triskelions, which I think is used more for seals than just motifs for gods. But Istaroth is the closest in design to Asmoday, especially the feet part. That being said, Istaroth has way more Venti-inspired details than you think. Rather, Venti Venti is inspired by Istaroth. Her eyes look much like Venti's, but instead of a circle with time points like a clock, it's just the floating time points themselves, and of course her eyes are gold, not green. She has wind chimes around her that alter noises in time whenever she moves, and her white hair which also has much longer braids. She also has a large clock hand behind her, followed by the clock itself floating above her head, as well as a dial, or what is basically a wristwatch but better. And the clock that she holds is also the same clock that we use to speed up time. Another interesting detail about Istaroth's design is that her chest has a motif of what looks like a Seelie. There have been theories of Seelies being connected to Istaroth and the Moon Sisters, and Venti's EP is also tied to the Seelies as well. The only possibility here is that Istaroth has another secret time loop strategy with the Seelies and the Moon Sisters, since it is of course her rule, and she likely is just helping almost anything she can and playing around with various histories of the world. Before we move on, in the unstable space, you can see Istaroth reverting back time while the shades were still talking, which perfectly represents how specific and exact Istaroth can use her rule of time. The tree's leaves move while the rest of the world doesn't, which means that she controls every moment of everything that's happening in every space they are in, down to the last detail. Next, Rhinnedottir or Gold and Naberius, the shade associated with life known for creating life forms, which might actually now include the powerful art of Chemia and being responsible for the creation of Albedo and Durin. She's also the one who created the life forms in Asmoday's unstable space. Starting off, we have Rhinnedottir and Naberius sharing a single body. Her entire design is straight up the personification of life down to the last DNA code. We already know that Rhinnedottir merged herself with the heart of Naberius, so this character we see is likely Rhinnedottir's actual body, with the only part of Naberius visible being her blue eye. Now, we've expected a dual personality to happen, but not in a way like this. I was honestly expecting them to have a more unstable consciousness, like a stutter between two personalities or two people's minds trying to steer the body. But a more calculated and calm interaction between a shade and a sinner in a single body actually works quite well for them. Whenever Naberius talks, however, we never see Rhinnedottir's real mouth if it's moving or not. But we can see Rhinnedottir's halo change from gold to blue whenever Naberius starts speaking in the teaser. Although Naberius' agency was taken away, whether or not Naberius can take control of Rhinnedottir's body is still possible. This, I think, could backfire on both of them at some point, unless they find a compromise on control like certain characters from Genshin and another from Honkai Impact. However, it's almost unbelievable for a sinner who caused the fall of Conria and is related to the Cataclysm indirectly to be hanging out with the shades that destroyed their home, from using the rule of life as a toy for her experiments, or going to outer space and using other shades as playing fields to create miniature worlds just to see what happens. She even says that she agrees with the plan like killing the Heavenly Principles, which should technically be a heretical statement, especially coming from a now shade with strict rules. She even mentions Pierro like they're co-workers in the same office building. But then again, the mind and motivations of the sinners is leagues beyond that of a normal humans. This stems from the fact that the Heavenly Principles still have yet to awaken, which means that the Heavenly Principles is in some sort of cryostasis or a millennia level hibernation mode while recuperating from past heavenly wars. This is also the likely reason why the ruler of the void, Asmoday, would have left for a new master too, but I'll talk about that later. For Rhinnedottir's design, the symbols on her eyes can only be the symbols of alchemy or chemia that Albedo used to make human Durin, and the blue symbols of a DNA molecule from Naberius, but it also reminds me of Alhaitham's specific dendro element, which, surprise surprise, Alhaitham and Kaveh having some deep relation to the origins of life itself. If you put them in order like a line, you can actually make the same helix molecule specific to Tevat's life forms in the teaser. Naberius' clothing design also resembles Sumeru's style as well, which if you look closely is actually merged with Rhinnedottir's own Conrian clothing too. The same motives are also present in her person, but since she's the ruler of life, her halo is that of a double helix mixed with the now flowers of Chemia that both Rhinnedottir and Albedo possess. This changes in color depending on which person is present as well. The most interesting fact about Rhinnedottir and Naberius is their use of computers to fabricate and code life forms into being, which is where the origin of all Dendro characters being computer-based actually comes from. Now, technology isn't really a surprise since the Dragon race and the Dragon Lords were technologically advanced already, but humans and anything under the Irminsul's era of creation is a different type of code of life in the modern era. They did, however, use the same type of code. C6 Ronova. Can you imagine what that could do? Man, Anyway, next is Best Girl Ronova, the shade of death and the seemingly most overworked and stressed, but also the calmest shade. So far, she seems like a pseudo-leader or at least a decision maker for the shades. But that doesn't mean that all the shades are the best team members. Apart from being the shade who has the rule over the most stressful act of death, she also has to deal with Rhinnedottir being a mad scientist since Naberius can't really help her, as well as dealing with Istaroth's time and history shenanigans, especially after her theorized memo sprite became a drunk Archon. But she also has to look for Asmoday, who for some reason decides to enjoy staying with her new master, which we'll talk about later, and that doesn't even add in all of the other mortals that cursed out that death, especially Capitano and Pierro. For now, just pray that Ronova doesn't Thanos snap the vat for being annoyed with everything. Now we all know that her power over death is pretty straightforward. It doesn't matter how they die or when, they just need to die. Something worth noting is her ability to make anything air quotes dead, and that includes spaces or bubble worlds like Asmoday's and the entirety of Tevat if she so decides to. Istaroth shows the intricacies of her rule in individual moments of time, while Rhinnedottir and Naberius show the complex level of her creation of life. But Ronova shows how simple but all-encompassing in scale that she has over the term death, to the point that the only thing that can stop her power is a paradoxical result of a simple deal made by herself. Another interesting detail is that her wings look exactly like the wings of the Thousand-Armed God in Inazuma. Now there are theories that the Thousand-Armed God is Istaroth, but I can't really argue with something like this. What that means for Inazuma, however, likely means that A was so close to gazing at Ronova on her pursuit of eternity for 500 years. The reason for A to find Ronova instead is because Makoto was the one reaching for Istaroth and not A. A was only open to that revelation after her battle with the Raiden Shogun and finding the will of Makoto from her sword. But in 2.0, that never happened yet, and she went into the plane of euthymia after she lost all of her closest friends, which means that the closest and most recent thing on her mind would be death. A also means shadow, while Makoto means truth, so calling forth the shadow or shade of death herself would be quite fitting for A, while discovering the truth from Istaroth is for Makoto. The plane of euthymia was also dark and red before we beat some sense into A's mind too, and the planet in her domain isn't actually a planet, it's the eye of Ronova. A was hard stuck on just eternity before, which led to her and the Raiden Shogun's kit being all about eyes, while Makoto's path was to move forward with the truth. It's an interesting contrast between the two and one that almost destroyed Inazuma. Her design is by far the best out of all the shades in my opinion. I'm usually a fan of white designs, but Renova's looks a lot better than the other ones for me. A dark gown and a white veil with the most prominent eye and triquetra motifs, along with golden eyes that resemble what intertwined and acquainted fates look like. Lastly, Asmoday, the shade of void or space, and who I think is actually the reason a gust of wind appeared in the shade's secret cosmic meeting. I mean, the missing shade is on that side of the conference, and everyone else is looking at that exact spot. A red aura that manifests out of nowhere, as well as sucking in the wind to that direction, can only mean that the power of space was used in that location, which either means that the shade of space is constantly late for every conference, or that Ronova created something nearby that for some reason sucked all the wind into that single point. For both cases, it can only mean that a portal appeared on that side of the room. But that's just one theory for Asmoday. The other is a bit of a running theory since the start of the game. We already know every detail about Asmoday, so I won't include that here, but did you know that every single cube that she makes could fit a single world space? Yeah, that little world that we see in the start is actually a space that Asmoday made. And what's more interesting is that this is in outer space, so the shades can in fact just leave Tevat and wander anywhere, probably within a set distance. They can go to Conria, which we thought was outside of the fake sky barrier, so they can pretty much go anywhere outside of the world, as well as being late to these conferences without any penalties, which means that there's currently no higher power above the shades, ergo the heavenly principles still being asleep. Now, since we know what Asmoday looks like and that she's often speculated to be Paimon, then it's a very likely possibility that the devs stuck with that too, just like they did with Venti and Istaroth. I for one think that that's very plausible, but not because of all the symbolic and lore-related things between Paimon and Asmoday, but it's especially because all the lore is coming together in Node Cry. That's why we've been getting these sudden lore drops in story quests, which predominantly come from world quests. And if Istaroth can make a Memo Sprite or just change into a form like Venti, then why can't Asmoday have a bit of a holiday with the Traveler as Paimon? All the three other shades already know that Asmoday found a new master, which means that it's likely the Traveler, and is also why they know so much already. An old theory I've had ever since the start of Enkanomiya is that the second one who came is currently the one taking care of the vat. That is who I think Asmoday's new master could be as well. And the second one is just hiding in Celestia, waiting for the primordial one to wake up. But I think that it's more likely going to be the Traveler instead. Now because of this weird combination of relations that connect to the Shades as the middle point, it's also likely that they know about the other sinners and the Hexen Circle's whereabouts, as well as everything that Istaroth does with time and Venti. But even if they're all Shades with world-ending powers, at the end of the day they're still just Shades designed by the primordial one. And whatever mission they have as Shades, be it to protect the vat, to keep the laws from changing, or to simply keep the heavenly principles from getting hurt while asleep, that mission is the only objective, and everything else happening in the vat doesn't matter so long as their duty as Shades isn't altered. The other possibility is that they don't exactly know what they're doing because their master is in cryostasis, and they've spent thousands of years just keeping Celestia from falling apart and keeping the world from dying completely, all in the hopes that one day the heavenly principles will awaken from their slumber. If you watched my theory on the Tsaritsa being in a sort of vegetative state and that Pierro is controlling all of Snezhnaya, then I would say the same as for the heavenly principles, except the Shades aren't as ambitious as Pierro, and neither are they trying to accelerate his awakening too. So they're just keeping the world in a form of stasis or stagnation until the heavenly principles wakes up. And the worst that they've done to keep their positions from faltering is working with a sinner who doesn't seem all that bad, honestly. Lastly, Celestia and the concept of killing gods. Pierro already thought of this and compared the price of that with simply gazing at the gods. If the price for gazing at the gods is the fall of a kingdom, then the price for killing a god would probably be the world itself. We're not talking about fighting the Shades, we're fighting the heavenly principles, the primordial one himself. And it's not just Pierro who wants to fight against the heavenly principles here. The Tsaritsa also wants to kill a god. And she also, for some reason, has knowledge of a god and its limits. She might be talking about the heavenly principles' limits as well. We already know the limits of the Shades since they can only act based on their rule, but finding a weakness of the primordial one himself is the sender level knowledge. Everyone right now is at a power level that is reaching or is probably equal to a descender at this point. It's just that no one has the will or mindset to make that change. You can notice the lack of willpower to change from the Sinners, the Hexen Circle, and the Shades, while the only ones with the will to change the world being from the Travelers, and one of them is for some reason not marked as a descender, which I think has something to do with Istaroth as well, and when she imparted history on our sibling as a prince or princess of Khaenri'ah. But as for Snezhnaya, who wished to kill a god, that in itself should only be something a descender can think of doing, but what makes it terrifying is that a human of their own creation wants to do it, and one of the key pieces of killing a god that they have is Columbina. Every Harbinger in the Fatui has the power that can rival that of an Archon, but the top 3 Harbingers have the power to rival that of a god. And Columbina is, especially since many theories suggest that she's the first Seelie who rebelled against the principles. Skirk's weapon, Azure Light, highlights all of the angels we've heard from all other regions, but it also highlights the first angel who started it all, the Dawn Maiden, who started the rebellion of the Seelies against the Primordial One. This was all because she fell in love with the Voyager who came from beyond the world, but I think it's better to phrase it as she fell in love with the idea that humans and humanity itself would be free to do what they wish, to have the authority to be what they want and not be under a god like the heavenly principles. The weapon description itself also mentions the power of love, which is very important since the Cryo Archon herself is theorized to represent love. It also mentions that humanity's desire should break the delusions created by the Primordial One, which is the fake sky and the idea of the heavenly principles. This, I think, is where the concept of rising up against the god started and where the idea of killing a god is, which is why I think Columbina is such a perfect fit for it. But that's not it, because Columbina specifically, I also think that she could be a Memo Sprite or has the power of the Shade of Death, Ronova. Everything that the Harbingers say about Columbina has always been so close to a shade, which is why I think that Columbina is the first Seelie who was cursed by Ronova to cause death on what she sees. The Wanderer says that she's unconcerned or unfeeling in any situation, but also oblivious and innocent, much like the Shade's unabiding rule. Arlecchino says that whatever Columbina says is always interesting, like a rhetoric intended to confuse or dissuade anything that you say against yourself, much like how every other Seelie or angel speaks and how the Shades speak to each other. And lastly, Child, even though he wants to fight every Harbinger, fighting Columbina doesn't feel right. It's as if Child's instinct to survive in battle doesn't work, as if he wouldn't just lose, but die if he ever tried, which counteracts every survival instinct that Child has. Another thing about Columbina is her singing, because I think that the one singing in that entire interlude teaser is actually Columbina, not as herself, but as the first angel who sang songs of the past. Now, I've always thought that Columbina had some ties with Ronova because she couldn't see. Now, if theory suggests that she's a biblically accurate angel that has wings with eyes, then that just straight up looks like Ronova's wings. If she ever opened her eyes, then she would have the same as Ronova's eyes of death, a curse likely placed on her as the first angel who caused the rebellion of all the angels, which is a curse to place death upon anything that she sees. The perfect curse for the first angel who wanted to see her people free, and the perfect weapon to kill a god, using the rule placed by the very shade who cursed her on the sleeping heavenly principles. That is why I think Columbina is important to the Fatui's plan to kill a god, and that doesn't even include the other harbingers like Dottore, Arlecchino, and Capitano. And there you have it, everything we know about the 4 shades as well as the Fatui's plan to kill the heavenly principles. Post-editing Aru here. My goodness. Jeez, I was supposed to make a Star Rail video at this point because I just finished the 3.4 patch as well as a Skirk video about the angels, but I guess Hoyo just decided to release a teaser about the shades. So I guess I have to do this video first. But yeah, everyone was not expecting Hoyo to release a teaser like this, especially not up to this level. And I do know that all of this is going to happen in like Node Cry, which is why I think that the shades are going to intervene and where I think they're going to intervene as well. And Columbina having to be trapped somewhere, I think that she actually has a power, a very deep power of hearing. Because in the teaser, whenever the guy starts speaking, you could see Columbina like listening or hearing the vibrations of the words that she hears. And also in that area, you could see what looks like flowers that are intavats as well. So maybe she's in Khaenri'ah or an area where intavats can still grow, which is really weird considering Node Cry already looks weird in the teaser. Oh my gosh, there's also other details like the quill that could change fate in the start of the teaser, the black crow in the water, and the white crow in reality, which means like some sort of albinism in Russian. Oh my god, there's way too many things happening and I don't have enough time to talk about it. So I'll just leave it at this, I guess. Yeah, that's about it. That's as much as I can talk about for this video. But anyway, that's gonna be it for now. I'll see you guys in the next video, yeah? As always, like, comment if you enjoyed, subscribe and hit the bell for more of my ramblings, and stay mad, theorists. Bye!